All righty. Hello, hello. How's everyone doing? We're here for cannabis. Come on, let's get excited. This isn't corporate finance. Come on, let's get it going. All right. So I'm Lake Smith. My name is Lake Smith. Obviously, I'm with QCI Solutions. We're a fractional regulatory support firm based out of California. We also provide financial strategy and any other consulting that you need in between. We work with operational providers. We want to make sure people get operational, can stay operational, stay compliant, receive the funding they need, and have sustainable growth and create a great industry. My co-founder and I were both from Maryland. We both grew up in Rockville, Maryland. We've had our own experiences going through, things a lot of social equity applicants go through. Spent a night in jail over a dime bag of bad weed. Great thing is it didn't ruin our lives, and we're able to go to California, start a great business. And if you didn't hear me before, QCI Solutions, fractional regulatory support and financial strategy. We work with the largest cultivator in California, which could be the largest cultivator in the world, given that market size. We work with many operators. We provide edification around compliance, financial strategy, and we're building a proprietary piece of technology. Enough about me, though, because I am just moderating this panel. This panel is about our experts here. So I would love to introduce Sierra, Lucas, and Jacob, founders of their own companies in their own right, here to provide great expertise and knowledge around building a strong team and culture and creating operational efficiencies.
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. My name is Sierra Parks. I'm the CEO and founder of CWC HR. We're an HR consulting firm. We've launched cannabis HR operations in 14 states in the U.S., and we make sure that businesses who want to run an operation can do so compliantly, find the right people, and have the right structure to sustain their business long term.
Hello. Check, check. My name is Lucas McCann. I'm the CSO of a regulatory and scientific consulting company called CanDelta. What we do is we help with the licensing piece, but we also help coach entrepreneurs through every single decision they would need to make when starting up a new business. Everything from putting together a pitch deck to basically point of sale, finding property, zoning compliance, floor plans, helping them figure out what they need to spend on security, implementing their tech stack, and just general, I guess, guidance and hand-holding. We never take any equity, and we're really just here to help coach entrepreneurs who are new to this industry, in an industry that itself is also brand new, in a way to help reduce the time that it takes to operationalize their business and to get them basically conducting transactions with other folks in the industry, be it that B2B or directly to consumers in a retail dispensary or patients.
Do the two mic thing. Hello, everybody. My name is Jacob Carlson. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Easy Hire Cannabis. We like to call ourselves the Indeed for weed. My background is actually in software. I worked at a CRM company called HubSpot for about 7 years, had a side business that was running with a couple of buddies that really worked as a trim crew in the legacy market up in Maine. So I had two friends who came to me and basically were like, hey, I think this could be a real business. So we started a trim crew. So for people who don't necessarily know who a trim crew is, there's a lot of the cannabis process that you don't necessarily need a ton of people. But once the plants are ready to be chopped down and put into the bags that we all buy in the stores, there's a lot of people that are needed in that point. That business was very tough, but that's where I learned the legacy market. My background, like I said, is in software. So what we did is we took the knowledge that we learned and how difficult it is to actually get that plant from the tree to the actual place that we're buying it. And a lot of that comes into play around hiring the right people, building the right team, and making sure that people understand what types of jobs they're coming into. One of the things I always would ask people is like, what kind of boots do you have, right? If you're going to go work out in a cultivation facility or out in a cultivation field outside, you better understand what kind of boots you have. So just being able to tell people what it's really like to work in the industry. But thanks again for having me. Thanks to Jackie as well. I'm excited to be on the panel.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for introducing yourselves. Just real quick, really want to thank the initial panel, Panelist A or Roundtable A. I really resonated with what Christina said over there, when having your exit in mind. Building your foundation, you got to think where you want to end. Do you want to end on the beach in the Caribbean? Do you want to ride your company to going public? Do you want to ride a private company until the day you die? Understand what you want, what your exit is, what your foundation will be, and then from there, It goes into building a strong team, a strong culture, and creating operational efficiencies to be sustainable in this industry. So starting off, my first question to the panel here is, to you guys, what does it mean to have a strong culture and a strong team?
So when you launch a business, right, and this is your business, and you get to say what happens day to day, what you want your company to feel like, that's culture. And every person you bring into that organization thereafter should understand the culture you're trying to build, the legacy you want, and the feeling you want other people to have as they walk through the door. And so I want you to be very thoughtful about that as you grow your business, because when you go from 1 to 5, 5 to 20, 20 to 75 plus, you really have to make sure that what you're doing is going to continue to breed the culture that you started out with. So that's what I'll say from an HR perspective.
I would say too, culture, thinking about different parts of your business. I know a lot of businesses that are looking to have potentially a retail location, a cultivation facility. Those operations run very differently. So having the expectation of what culture looks like, what mission looks like, what all of those things look like, when problems happen that we all see inside of the HR world, it's much easier to point to a central mission or a central value system that you all are pointing to. Even understanding cultivation and grow is going to run a little bit different than the retail spot does, but having some good culture at the top and having that be top down is very, very important, at least from what I've seen.
I think that's a great question. So really we're boiling this down to what is culture? And when you are working in cannabis, and if we look at sort of how cannabis is positioned in relative to all industries, alcohol, tobacco, cannabis is sort of the Mount Everest when it comes to the peak of compliance and regulatory requirements with overtaxation and overregulation, limits on what you can say and what you can do and who you can expose that information to. You really have to understand that everything that we do in our culture has to be a reflection of compliance. We need to build a culture of compliance, and with that is an understanding of why it is we're doing what we do. And I like to think of culture as what you can train your team, your partners, even all the way down or all the way up to the officers and directors who represent the company. It's whatever they're doing when you're not in the room, right? It's whatever systems that they're falling back on that they use as sort of their go-to. And, it's not one of those industries where you can let instincts aside. So culture has to start on day one, and it has to start with why we're doing it, why we're here. And if I forget this information, what do I go and reference in order to figure out what the next steps are?
No, honestly, that's a great segue. I'm going to pivot to just something you brought up and creating a strong culture and having ethics. We work in regulatory compliance in California. Dirty little secret. All our clients ask us, what's the cost of being non-compliant? What is the cost benefit of us skirting the rules versus us doing the right thing? And if you have ethical considerations, you wouldn't even think about asking that question. However, we understand how the world is. So to my experts here, how do you maybe create a foundation of strong ethics within a team, within a culture? What are your philosophies? What are your strategies? What are your thoughts around that?
How do you build ethics?
Just create an ethical foundation.
So I think when you're building a team, and I'm gonna borrow the word diverse for a moment here, to represent various skill sets in this context. And I think it's really important that if you are hiring, that you hire people that are not like yourself.
Yep.
And I think that's important because if you hire just a bunch of like-minded people, you're all going to solve unprecedented questions in a very like-minded way.
Oh, yeah.
So having broad skill sets to the table is super important. And, for a lot of folks coming into this, again, new industry, and they themselves are brand new, where do you look to for the experience and the culture and really the foundation of those ethics? And now I'm getting into we need to create a pathway that allows for the conversion of the legacy folks into a regulated market. And I think that is important on so many levels. One, because we've done this before, so why would we reinvent the wheel? And two, because if you take folks who have established and built the legacy market, on blood, sweat, and tears, carry that market on their shoulders for decades, if not hundreds of years, then the illicit market will follow into the regulated market. And that is where I think we need to look to how to build this industry. is look to the folks who have been doing this, who have been incarcerated, and who have been paving the way.
Exactly. You got it. Jake, go on.
I think it's an interesting topic, especially when you think about the legacy market and how cannabis has operated previously to it becoming legal. I know a lot of my first early days explaining payroll tax or insurance, right, to legacy operators, and them just quite frankly not wanting to necessarily, like you said, like necessarily comply to what traditional business has to follow to be able to operate. I have a little bit of a legacy background. I also have a corporate background myself, but I think, to be quite honest, the ethics that need to change within inside of the cannabis industry, we actually need to step it up quite a bit to be able to be considered a little bit more legitimate as far as an industry goes, right? Business ethics, things that are involved and that happen inside of cannabis operations and businesses just quite frankly don't happen at the same rate that they do in other businesses. And that makes the cannabis industry look like an industry that needs to be regulated even harder than it necessarily is, like we had mentioned before. So I think traditional business ethics is something that needs to be taught to, especially from the legacy market and wanting to enter the legitimate market itself. And I'm saying that as somebody who was a legacy person myself. It's payroll tax is inevitable. If you want to run a business, you have to have payroll tax. You have to have insurance. You have to do these common things that I think the previous market and the previous businesses just quite frankly haven't had to do, which makes it difficult if you want to grow your business in a legitimate way, especially when you talk about all the regulations. It's just an added feature. So I think ethics and making sure that people are, like you said, paying attention when nobody is looking, I think that's a huge, huge point. But I do think we need to step it up as far as an industry goes if we want to be considered a more legitimate industry itself.
Just a quick thing to speak to on that point, because one of the challenges that I think we've seen with moving folks from the legacy market into the legal market is now everything that we were doing, everything that worked before, now all of a sudden you have to document that. You have to have a journal entry, a logbook, an SOP for that. And I think that's one of the challenges that we continue to see is taking something that used to work beautifully kind of on its own by itself, and now we're putting it through this lens of overregulation. And that's where I think there's the activation energy, because we have to retrain, we have to rethink, and we have to redo, and then retrain, and then review. And that certainly takes time, and it takes a lot of effort. And that's one of the points of overregulation that we have in this industry, is that you really have to document every single thing scrupulously.
Challenges, but these challenges present a lot of opportunities, and a lot of opportunities, we can provide a lot of solutions. A lot of us here, we work in ancillary businesses because we want to provide the solutions outside of the cannabis supply chain. And there are so many ideas, so many needs that are out there. So, hey, just always think outside the box and you can provide that solution. But segueing to the next question, diversity and inclusion, social equity. These are buzzwords that I do believe have been kind of destroyed by the political narrative that's currently out there. At the same time, too, we all know how important it is. I mean, this industry is being founded on the backs of people that are currently incarcerated. So with that being said, what does diversity and inclusion, social equity mean to you personally and for your organizations?
So this is right up my alley. So my organization is based in DEI and leading DEI principles and strategy for organizations. And so it's important for me as a Black woman, which is how I identify, Black woman in America, that we are able to say that everyone has an opportunity to grow their dream. And so that is what this is about, right? It's the ability for us to say that at some point you were marginalized. At some point you absolutely were on the other side of the table and what it meant to be over-scrupulized by the cannabis industry, the legacy market. And on the other side of this, you have an opportunity to gain just as much as everyone else. And that's what it means to me, right? You have the opportunity now to be able to say that you can gain as much as you should have before we had all of the regulations in the 80s and all the laws then.
That's a great point. I think for me personally, what it means for me working in a woman-owned, Black-owned company is being an ally, being eyes and ears, and understanding that every single door or every single day, when I come into work, one, I got to check my privilege at the door. I got to try and look through this world through everybody else's eyes. And I need to renew my ally badge every day. Just because you do something great one day, that's great. That's yesterday. What are you going to do today to push this forward? What are you going to do today to make a difference and to make an impact? And cannabis is one of the most pretentious industries. And Maryland's, I think, a great testament to this, because we have a social equity program. There's opportunity here for those who were most impacted to be some of the first in line. Not always, but there's a channel there for that. And that's so important when we bring in a regulatory framework, because what that means to me is truth, reconciliation, and to a point, restorative justice. Restorative justice to, again, an industry that has largely been illegal, and the folks who have participated in the industry were disproportionately, not just by a little bit, but to a very large extent. No statistical analysis could sort of correlate this, but Black and brown people.
Get it? I would say we still are, unfortunately, as part of the process. And I think the opportunity is really when I think of diversity and inclusion, at least for a new business or a new market that is coming into place. I think the idea of trying to restore some of the things that are still continuously going on within inside of the industry. People are still in jail. People are still getting arrested in all sorts of states, and they're being arrested at unproportionately levels of people of color and women. It's just what's happening, right? So the expectation of that this new industry is growing, it's building, and there's still people that are being arrested. There's still people in jail. I think that's like the biggest disheartening thing for me, is that, there's companies that are making millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. And there's people still in jail for a quarter pound of weed, right? You can go to the store and buy it, right? Sort of thing. I think it just guts me when I think about it, and I think about the opportunity that I'm able to have. And I know that I don't have the solution for it, would be the other thing. I don't know if the solution is giving somebody a cannabis license that's never had a running business themselves, giving them $500,000 in a great location. I don't know if that's the solution. It sounds good, right? I'm from Massachusetts, based out of that, so we saw a lot of that. I don't know if that's the best way to set people up for success, or it's just kind of like a trap, right, that has been set. And unfortunately, that's a lot of what I've seen, is it's been set up as a trap, right? I would advise anyone that's a person of color to be cautious of that, cautious of the social equity people, cautious of that sort of expectation. And the reason is that it's set up the same way, right? The expectation of you're supposed to have an advantage or a head start. Please try to take advantage of that, and please ask questions. Please don't be turned away from the opportunity to not necessarily have to be a social equity focused business. You can be a business owner yourself. You can grow that part of it as well, because I don't know if I would trust the regulatory boards or trust some of the opportunities that have happened, at least over the first 3 to 5 years sort of thing. I know Maryland has some stuff set into place now, but I know it hasn't. You won't ask a ton of people in Massachusetts if it's gone successfully, if it has, right? And I think money doesn't always solve that. Education helps solve that. Collaboration helps solve that. It's obviously a big topic for me as well. My father immigrated from Ethiopia in 1982. And we're not in the African-American sort of mindset. We're much more in the African immigrant mindset, but it doesn't matter. I got arrested as a senior in high school with an eighth of weed and told that my life would be ruined. And somehow I figured it out from there. And I think that's part of what we need to try to solve for. I know I was a little bit all over the place, but I do think it's an important topic to be able to discuss. So,
No, I appreciate that. Thank you guys for all that feedback. I mean, as we all know, it's incredibly important to prioritize and continue to renew your commitment to diversity and inclusion and social equity every single day, with every action you take, every business channel, everything you do within your organizations. Now, I guess pivoting to something a bit more practical. My objective is to be the least intelligent person in my organization. I want to hire people that are much smarter than me to complement and get our vision out there. But that is always the toughest thing. Hiring, staffing, finding the right people to complement your team. As these social equity applicants win licenses, because everyone here will be successful and they will win licenses in this lottery, once they get to that point, what do they do next? How do they find good talent? Because I'm struggling to figure that out myself.
So the first thing is, don't be quick to hire your friend, your family, your ride or die, whoever's been with you on the sidelines, right? That might not be your first hire, and that's okay. A lot of times that's what we see happen, especially in cannabis businesses, right? We hire people who have been around, and those people will do a couple of things. One, they may thrive with you, right? They may be the right person on your team, or they may be the person who kills your culture. This is the person who is absolutely working against you, regardless of how much you may think that they're on your team, or they may stall out after some point. I want to make it very clear. The person that you start your companies with, people who are your first couple of hires, may not be with you by the time you get to hire number 50. And you have to be okay with recognizing when a person no longer works, they're no longer a good fit for your team, they're no longer growing the business or working in the direction that you're working towards. You got to be ready to let them go. Amicably, of course, right? And legally, but you got to be able to cut ties when it's time to do so.
Yeah, I love that one, friends and family. That's usually one of our first discovery questions of like, how many of your friends and family have you hired and how has that worked out?
Yeah.
Right? It's usually not the greatest way. The big thing for me, and one of the things we try to convey, at least when we're getting candidates to create profiles on Easy Hire and look for jobs, and what we ask from our employers is to be honest, right? A lot of people have huge aspirations of coming into the cannabis industry. They want to be the VP of sales. They want to own their own company. People come up to me at events like this. They say, "Oh, I don't want to work at True Leaf. I want to be you." Well, I'm 40 years old. I worked at a CRM company that went public. Like, there's a lot of things that I have been able to enough to grow my business. Now, being honest about what the roles are, we just pulled some data from the CCC in the state of Massachusetts, and we started to figure out, like, what are the roles in cannabis, right? 85% of the people that work in Massachusetts in cannabis work in one of three places: retail, cultivation, and production. None of those are very sexy necessarily jobs. Most of those jobs are under $50,000 to $60,000 a year. Most of them are hourly employees. Most of them are working on a set weekly schedule. Most of them don't have a huge upswing of being able to grow throughout the business itself. And I think setting those expectations is probably the thing that the cannabis industry, I think, has swung and missed as most, is that they're telling people that they're getting this job that it's not. Like, I tell people, hey, if you didn't like your job at Target, probably not going to like it at True Leaf, right? Because it's way more like working at Target than it is selling weed when you were in college. It's not selling eighths in your backpack in college, right? It's a POS system. It's showing up at 11 o'clock on time, right? It's not missing your work. It's all those sorts of things that are much more like working at Target. And there's hundreds of thousands of people that love working at Target, right? If you don't think you're one of those people that's going to love working at Target, right? True Leaf's very similar, right? Sort of thing. So I want to make sure that people are setting the expectation of what the roles people are going to, right? If you're a trimmer, the expectation that you're going to be the GM, probably pretty low, and that's okay, right? Sort of thing. There are people that want to do that. So when we see these high turnover rates in cannabis, and I'd love to see like your opinions on this, but like for me, it's mostly because people aren't telling people the truth about what the job is. Then they're getting into the job and they're like, man, I love weed, but wow, this job sucks. I'm going to go back to be a waiter. I made a lot more money and I'll just smoke weed at lunch, right? Sort of thing. That's a lot of what we see, and that's okay. If we tell people that story and we tell them that beforehand, I don't think we'd have the same sort of turnover rates. I think we would be much more cleaner as an industry, but hopefully that helps a little bit of kind of what we see as well.
That's a question that I personally struggle with. I think there's a lot you have to consider when being a small business, and one of those is going to be variable expenses. So I would say when you think you have to hire, maybe don't. It could be very, very tough going through the process of letting people go when things change. And in nascent industries, typically what we're going to see is all those that open up, retail dispensaries, let's say, they're going to do very well for the first 3 to 5 years. And it gets very easy to become comfortable spending money. So easy. And the reality is that as competitors enter the market, oversupply will eventually happen. We see price compression, prices fall down, the margins might stay the same, but you're making less on every eighth you're selling. Then eventually you have to make some tough decisions. So I would really follow the mantra of, hire slow, fire fast. I just prefer the hire slow side because I don't really like firing people. So really take your time in understanding when it is you need to add to your workforce, especially if you're convincing others to come and follow you and buy your story and leave their jobs. I'm a big promoter of nurturing people into roles that I want them to do, as opposed to hiring someone who's done it before. And I think that when you do that, and I'm talking about safely here, right, in a very, very safe and controlled and nurturing way, is that you hire people with something to prove. They're going to give you so much, right? And if you find someone that you trust and you believe in, someone who has a history of achievement, you've seen that they've stayed at companies, or they've done degrees and they've completed those degrees, or they've been promoted in their past experiences, that to me speaks volumes when people have shown evidence that they've worked really, really hard. So looking for that history, I think is important. And then maybe the last piece is if someone was coming to you and they say, I'm making $100,000 at this job and I realize what you're offering is 60, but I believe in you so much and I believe in what this industry is doing that I'd be willing to meet you, halfway, or even take a drastic pay cut. I would say that's someone who actually believes in what they're doing and recognizes the benefits of what they be contributing to the industry, and probably a worthwhile investment.
Thank you, guys. That's great. I mean, this is going to be work. Just like everything else, you're going to have to put in good, hard work, sweat equity to make this happen. I look at it, example, the rocket scientists at NASA back in the 40s or in the 50s, every rocket blew up, and then they put a man on the moon. We're in that phase right now. We're blowing up rockets, but eventually we will get to the moon and maybe even cultivate on the moon one day, which would be pretty cool. Now, segueing, I guess, into once you hire your staff, you get people together, what kind of training and development should individuals be focused on? And I'll do a shameless plug. All the organizations that we lead up here have resources that, can provide edification in this aspect. But I'd love to hear specifically from each of you, what areas would you lean into first for training and development of individuals coming into this industry that are passionate, hardworking, but really don't know much about weed, or maybe just sold weed back in college? Where do you train them and how do you train them?
So the reality is most people coming into cannabis didn't have cannabis experience on the back end, right? They had a passion for it. And so you need to be mindful of that. Maybe they have transferable skills, like maybe you really did work a register somewhere else, so maybe you know how to do a POS with us. But that's not the same as them making sure that they're logging everything into metric and they're moving inventory legally. And so you want to be very thoughtful about not skimping on training. And I'm not talking about the pie in the sky training. I'm talking about the things that you are going to have to do to keep your business in regulation. What are those things? And then the next step of that is, who is teaching people? Everyone is not meant to be a trainer. And we know that. You have people who do a job really well, but that doesn't mean they need to lead people. Maybe they're a process manager. And so what does it look like to make sure you've got the right person leading and training on the right tasks? You're documenting things. You have handouts. You have reference kits that people can look back to. Those are the types of things that build a strong training plan. Do not skimp early. And if it meant that you had to delay pending there wasn't going to be some major fine to do so, I would tell you delay to make sure your training was right, so that when you released your business and opened your org and opened the front doors for people to come through, you were ready and not on the job trying to figure it out then, because that's where things suffer. And you know how it is. You go to a place one time, this didn't go well, I'm not coming back here. And you do not want that to be the case with your business when you're launching and you're training and you're launching your team's best foot forward.
Yeah, training is super important. One of the things that we have realized with Easy Hire is a lot of times when people are onboarded to their first cannabis job, they're not trained. They might be passionate about the plant, like you mentioned, but then they have a customer come into the dispensary and they ask them a question that they just quite frankly don't know the answer to, right? How does this chemical work with this chemical? I have diabetes. How will this affect my gummy that I take, right? Sort of thing. And you might not know the answer to that. And what we've started to get feedback from people is like being underconfident, being unable to be able to answer a simple question from a customer. That's a pretty terrible experience, right? So if you're working in a job where you don't know the answer to customers who are coming into your store and asking you certain questions and you're not able to answer them, that's not a really good work experience, right? And the expectation of people leaving tends to be one of the highest reasons we see people are leaving. Oh, it's not a great work experience. Nobody knows what's going on. I was trained by this Google Doc file that they sent me with all the stuff that I should read, and they told me to ask the person who's next to me as the bud tender if I didn't know the answer. And then the person leaves and they go back to their waiter job and so on and so forth from there. So that's what we're seeing in the industry. For us, it's so important that we are pre-qualifying people and they understand what they're getting into when they're getting into a retail position, or they're getting into a trimming position, or they're getting into a cultivation position. These things have processes, and being able to educate people from day one prevents them from leaving 2-3 months down the road, which as a business, you don't have to be like, an economist necessarily to figure out. Somebody starting and getting onboarded to your business for 2 months and then leaving is one of the worst cost loss that you will have in any small business, cannabis, anything. It doesn't matter, right? So hiring a good team is super important. And I think training people sets them up so they're not in those situations where they feel uncomfortable, they're unable to answer those questions. But that's the reason we're seeing people leave, and we push people to do as much free training as they humanly possibly can.
That's a great point. Just on the matter of compliance, if bud tenders are speaking to interactions with diabetic medicine and cannabis, I really would advise against that. I really would definitely not have them make any kind of medical claim associated with weed. But anyway, going back to training and my philosophies on that, what I personally do, and I don't know if this is the best thing, but what I found has worked for me in the past was whenever I try to hire in a group, let's say 2-3 people at least, maybe 4 or 5, depending on where we're at. And I clear my schedule out for 2 or 3 days. And I bring everyone into a boardroom, and it's chalk talk, and it's going from everything from the history of cannabis to the history of the law and the regulations, all the way through to company culture and values. And I think that's important. I've looked at doing the video thing. I've looked at doing like questionnaires and self-guided study. And I just haven't seen that be as effective as being able to spend 3 days with unfettered access from someone who helped start the company to be able to get the vision, because that, I think, is the best way to transmit your vision and get buy-in, right? And really get an understanding as to why it is we're doing what we're doing and why it's important and what is the impact that we're going to make. That, again, is kind of an old school way of doing it. It works well. Retail, cultivation jobs typically are not ones that are work from home positions. So, putting new hires in a place where they can be exposed to those that have the answers and they can shadow and be able to ask questions, I think, is the best way to help incubate these people as quickly as possible.
Makes sense. I love that. I love all this here. We have training and development drives retention. If you want good employees, you're going to have training and development. Cohorts and coming in and training people together in cohorts. It's similar to a Navy SEAL bud class or a fraternity pledge class. You come in together, you cut your teeth together, you learn together, you have people you can complement one another. And then SOPs, documentation, having that written down. If you want to actualize something, first you got to write it down. Now, to your point on SOPs and documentation, we know that there's going to be a lot of complexity. I mean, we're regulatory experts here. There's significant complexity across one jurisdiction, let alone across the entire nation. And what will that look like in the future should changes occur, maybe a few weeks, as Christina mentioned earlier. What kind of technology, what strategies, what tools would you utilize within your firm to drive operational efficiencies so that everyone has access to this knowledge and everyone knows what to do on a day-to-day basis?
So I would think the most foundational thing for you to implement in this space is a good organizational chart. And it sounds super simple, but when you are the business owner, do you want everyone banging on your door every time they have a question? So make sure you understand everyone else knows who to talk to first, how the escalation chain should work, what the procedures are, where the documents are located, where the training guides are, so that by the time a decision gets to you, it's really a you decision and not a decision that should have been somewhere 4 people down in the chain. So that's the first thing I would say for sure.
I can speak to that. I mean, there's a lot of technology that's out there that allow us to help us do our jobs much more easily. But let's face it, as a startup company, we're not going to have all the nice things. You know, my mom used to always say it's very healthy to want things, but you have to be able to live in the now where you don't always have all the things you would like. So I think people need to be comfortable with the fact that they're working off the paper records. And as a virtue of paper records, you need to have strong understanding about things like version control, right? So people going in, making little edits. Eventually you've got 15 copies of the same document. So having a review process, version control, implementation, I think is going to be very, very important. So being strong at the fundamentals and some kind of centralized way of monitoring that, I think is going to be very important. And that could be as simple as having a Google Doc and some kind of review commenting process. It doesn't have to be expensive. I guess the other piece on that is on top of document control, eventually when you do get the nice things, there's a lot of ways to sort of automate things from temperature monitoring, environmental control that document a lot of these things. But, again, sort of speaking to how things might work before, it comes down, I think, to just discipline and really good habits. For example, like every time someone goes into a secure storage, if they don't have some kind of access control on the outside of that door, they might have to fill out a logbook each time they're accessing that area, because the regulator can come by, look at camera footage and say, where's the time when you, let's say, forgot your pen in that room, you entered the room, did not fill out the logbook, and I can see you entered at 12:01, there's no entry for 12:01. So again, sort of implementing this new way of thinking now because you're in cannabis, and cannabis is obviously the most dangerous regulated substance in the world, that you need to act accordingly.
Good answer. I'm going to take it a little bit of a different angle and talk about a software that most cannabis businesses should know, whether you want to work in it or whether you're starting a business. It's called Metric. People ask me all the time, Jacob, how do I get a job? I can't get an interview at a cannabis business, You know what I tell them? Learn Metric, right? If you're an expert in Metric, no retail facility, no cultivation place, no one's going to get rid of you. They're going to keep you forever. So the expectation of learning some of the core softwares, if people don't know what Metric is, it's a seed to sale software that the state requires that every bit of cannabis, and I'm not an expert at this, so I'm sure I'll screw it up, but it's a seed to sale, basically tracking from the point that you put the seed into the ground to the point that it's sold in the packaging. I've never seen anyone get fired that is an expert in Metric. So I would look at anybody looking to work in the cannabis industry or people looking to start a cannabis business, learn Metric if you can.
Thank you, guys. One thing I've realized just across organizations, even like interpersonal relations, that communication is usually at the heart of success or failure and lack thereof. What kind of strategies, tips, tricks, just any advice you would provide to the crowd here to just foster communication, better communication in the initial outset and then as companies scale and grow? I know, simple yet tough question.
I like step-up meetings. So basically that means that having, to Sierra's point, the org chart is super, super important, like massively important. I think the opportunity for different people in different parts of the organization to be able to communicate is vastly important, and the ability to be able to make the company work better. A lot of times I don't necessarily know what's going on in the day-to-day in certain people inside of my business, and the expectation that they can come to me and that they're going to have, once a month, or they're going to get to talk to Jacob and tell him all the terrible problems that goes on in the, part of the business that we're working with. I think of step-up meetings. So somebody being able to say, hey, I'm the director of cultivation. I'm going to go meet with the trimmers. I'm going to go meet with the grow associates, and being able to have a direct level of communication with that, and having your management team be comfortable with that and understanding that that's going to be a part of the process, right? I think it susses out a lot of bad culture, right? Necessarily, if there's people who are what I like to call them like the middle management part of the industry, who I always think of like know where the bodies are, know where the bad efficiencies have been running, and they've been a part of setting up those bad efficiencies for a long period of time. But I think step up meetings between, the entry level people and some of the higher level leadership can help start that communication better throughout the industry and throughout an organization.
It's a great example. I hadn't heard of that. So that's awesome. I'm going to take that home. I like to start the day off with a quick 10-minute stand-up, just see what everyone's working on. And really, it's not about listing off all the things you're going to do in your day, but it's just, oh yeah, and this one thing I forgot about, and then everyone kind of hears about it. I think it's just a great exercise. Standing up just tries to create it brief and very, very quick to the point. Big proponent of Slack. I love Slack. I mean, if you're not using Slack, it's great because one, it's searchable. You have channels for everything. You have a record of it. It just works so well. Big fan of that. And then from I guess, a career nurturing perspective, a growth perspective, and a feedback perspective, because we as leaders need to know how well we're doing and where our gaps are, is just having frequent one-on-ones with all of our staff. I get a lot of value from that, not because I'm offering the career trajectory to my employees, but also because I get to hear on how good of a job I'm doing. And I love hearing people talk about me. I love the sound of my own voice. So those are two ways that I get to really, I'm teasing. No, that's a great way to sort of understand where your gaps are and what resources you can create for those who are working in your org.
Common trait of a founder of a company. Loves to hear themselves talk.
That's a really good point. CEOs, leaders, owners, you are not the communicator you think you are. And so the message that you're putting out into the world, what you're trying to trickle down may not be hitting its mark. So make sure that there are people in between who are filtering your messages accordingly, and they're filtering them in the way that the people who are supposed to be getting them are getting them just the way they're supposed to receive it. And you know exactly what I mean. You get your budget for the month. It looks like this. Where is all this bleed out going? Probably the first person you call gets a real hot message, right? By the time that gets down to your bud tender, it looks a little bit differently. It sounds more like, hey, we want to make sure that we're not wasting X. We want to make sure that we're being mindful of the things that are being printed that don't need to be printed, right? They're very practical by the time they get down to the bottom of the chain. But I want to make sure that as leaders, you have someone in place who is translating things for you in the business, because there's nothing worse than getting a message from your CEO that makes you feel like you've done something wrong when you didn't have anything to do with that. And as a business owner, especially in a small growing company, that happens quite often and it burns people out.
Yeah, one last thing I'll add to that is in person is important. And do in person as much as you humanly possibly can. I'm in my happy place on a Zoom call with my, in my little home office and all those sorts of things. Most of my job for a long time was in that. There's a reason that in-person stuff is so important in the cannabis industry, especially when you talk about trust and you talk about internal trust with inside of your team. If you're not willing to go over to the cultivation facility an hour and a half, 2 hours away once a month with inside of your business, to understand how it's operating, to take the team out to lunch, to go see what the team is working on, that's where culture issues become. That's where the problem starts to become. And in person, making sure that we're all on the same team and we're all plugging into the same unit is very, very important from a leadership level. I think I forget that sometimes so much, even with my team, of like a little Slack or an email or, hey, great job on that. That goes such a long way. And I think in cannabis, because there's so much complexity that's happening at the top and the people that are trying to get their business open, there's a million things that are on their plate all the time. A lot of times they're not necessarily thinking, oh, what's going on at the grow? Oh, what's going on at the location, right? And we need to plug that into part of our day if we want to prevent the negative culture, the negative things that happen with inside of the business. I think getting in person is super, super important. So shout out to everyone that came out here today, because being in person is super important.
And to those on Zoom too who couldn't be here today, we still appreciate you. We do, we really do. But to say that nothing will replace this in-person experience that we have. This is great. This is what the industry needs. It's the networking, it's the communicating with people face to face. It's knowing that, Phil from Global Go is like super tall and that guy's got really cool socks and has an awesome personality. You don't see that on Zoom, right? So we really appreciate these intricacies. This is the community that we've developed and we are continuing to build. This is CannabizMD, if we'll let us sort of plug that term in. So love the face-to-face as well and the handshake.
Say thank you. I don't care if you don't know their name. Say thank you. They showed up today. They're in your business working. This is your dream. This is your passion. People do not have to support you. You got your own cousins who don't come up and buy your things. Say thank you to the people who put the time and the effort in to support the dream and the vision that you have every single time you see them.
Great. How are we on time, Jackie?
Yeah, they're going to shooting.
Of course. Let's do it.
From within the audience, go right there. I'm not going to let go.
I think you all touched on some really good points, but my question is like, how do you socialize and or incorporate some form of change or change management?
So good change management practices, industry agnostic, would be that there is a process for change in your industry. And what that means is, or in your business. So what that means is every time we make a change at Acme Company, it looks like this. There is this document. There is this communication from whomever to whomever. There is this much time notification in front of the actual change being implemented. And then from there, we're saying we're going to give people the proper training, and then we'll launch it. But there has to be a practice along the way that everybody agrees that we've done all these things in front of saying there is a change tomorrow. Specifically in cannabis, you may not have a lot of time because it might be that the MMCC comes in and says, hey, effective tomorrow, we don't do this anymore. And we know that's the case. So in those situations, you have to be prepared to say we know what the steps are and we can activate those very quickly because the process is very streamlined and documented, and we know who all the key players are in change management strategies.
That's a great answer. Honestly, that was textbook. I think that was fantastic. We have this saying, especially in consulting, is that we never say, this document is a draft. That's not what we say. We say this is a living, breathing document, right? And just having that process for how these reviews would come in, having someone that puts their signature on it and takes accountability, and understanding that there are steps that have to be maintained and discipline to follow those steps is what I would recommend.
We have another question.
Thank you. Gotcha. My name is Jordan Keys. I'm actually with Lake with QCI. Cannabis to me is a very new industry. I feel like it's one of the most industries with the most opportunity for change and for innovation. As someone who used to work in the dispensary as a bud tender, a lot of the issues surrounding culture were rooted in operational strategies and compliance. What tools do you guys, I guess, wish you had or would like to see in the industry with a lot of the new technology that's available, and it's only going to, continue to be in the opportunity? So what tools do you guys wish you had or would like to see?
I would actually say some of the lack of technology. And what I mean by that is when you launch your business and you start putting out your information in the internet, what's going to happen is you're going to get calls about a lot of things. And it's knowing what things do I really need and which things are nice to haves and which things are in a different iteration of my business, and being able to say, this is a great tool, but we're not there yet. And I see a lot of times where business owners will lock themselves into some type of subscription or service or tool that they don't roll out or can't launch, or it's not good for their business, or it doesn't work for their people. And now we're locked in and we're paying money for it. So I would actually say just be cautious of locking into anything too soon before you've really decided, have I seen all the competitors, number one, and number two, is this really what we need at this stage of our business today?
I might look at something simple like even a questionnaire to be able to allow people who are working inside of your business to be able to give feedback without having it go directly to your actual one-on-one manager. That's why I think the step-up meetings can be very important, because it also puts the manager on notice, right? Like, hey, your boss is going to be talking to the bud tender. So if you've been a jerk to them the whole time, you haven't prepared them as well, you're going to do your job differently, right? So I think I look at questionnaires, and simple as something like Google Forms. Like, I know there are other platforms and software out there, but you'd be surprised in what sort of answers you get from people that are working the shifts when, or doing the things with inside of your business. You might not be communicating with them. So I think of like a monthly questionnaire sort of thing to give employees access and be able to give feedback back to the leadership. Bad culture is usually rooted to like what you said. It's like there's a disconnect between the people that are doing the job and the people that are running and owning and operating the business. I think that could be another point to help out a little bit by just being able to ask people, how's it going, right? And being able to allow them to respond anonymously, as well as also a way to be able to figure out getting better answers. So
I have a question from online. In a growing age of freelance, contract versus full-time employees, what do you advise in the hiring process? And also on that note, the feds are paying attention to the whole 1099.
That is a great question. If you can 1099 them, you should do so. You don't need a full-time marketing team. You're 2 people. You don't need a full-time security guard today if you don't have a location. Maybe you need them to move 1 or 2 things. Be thoughtful about saying, is this a role that I need 40 hours a week and I need them to be on my payroll? Why? Right? There are good reasons why. There absolutely are. Is this person integral? Do you need them to be able to have certain accesses that they can't have if they're not a W-2? But if you can 1099 them, you should do so. Plug here for my organization. You don't need a full-time HR team. You're 6 people. But you do need to make sure that people are being onboarded and offboarded properly. You do need to make sure that training is happening. You do need to make sure you have change management and onboarding plans for your team. But do you need that person to be on your team and on your payroll? So I would say absolutely. Where you can, outsource.
I think that's a great way to start. There is a delicate balance where I think you will hit with a contractor where you realize that they're going to be more expensive than having someone in-house. But I think there's always a point where you need to start, and then maybe 6 to 12 months down the road, start to analyze and see if someone in-house is going to give you more of the attention that you actually need and deserve for the same price.
Okay, we have a question right here.
Maria Anderson, CEO of Marico Consulting. We do business operations a lot, like what you do, Sierra. And the response that you gave made me cringe a little bit, just because, in the HR space, Department of Labor, the overtime rule and the contractor rule under the Trump administration, now under the Biden administration, they're really coming down a lot on that. So the whole 1099 thing kind of made me, is this person essential to your business? But are they doing the operations that you require in order to function? That's a huge, thing for HR. But my question for you and also Jacob is, in the cannabis industry, can you talk more about how the HR is different? For example, the handbook. There's a lot on drug and alcohol policies that, federally, you can know what I'm saying. The federal law says one thing, but then the state law is different. And I know this is like really into our field, but how do you work around those parameters?
So I would say pull the regulations. Every state's regulations are different. And so when you're writing policies, when you're looking at what needs to happen, it's what do the COMAR regulations say about this very specifically? And is it written down in that way? Because you're going to have to speak to it if someone comes in or you're audited to say, this is the policy that we followed. Here it is written. If we had to make a decision about something or off board or why we made a decision in general, even if it's not people related, it's going to be based on what the COMAR said and what you interpret it best as. Because sometimes it's not necessarily what it says because it's not clear. It's based on our interpretation. This is what we thought it to mean. And every time we interpreted it the same way because you don't want to have those types of inconsistencies. Some days it's this and some days it's this. That's where you get yourself into issues with the auditors.
I would say just try to be as transparent as you can. That's probably, and have a straight line to Sierra's point of how you're interpreting the rules and regulations, and have that be from top down. There can't be any inconsistencies with that, because that's where bad culture comes up. That's where a lot of things that we obviously don't want with inside of a business. But yeah, there's a lot of debate with that, and I think being straightforward and transparent around this is a W-2 position, this is a 6-month position. That's the biggest thing I see, is people being transparent and open to it. So
it gets warm right there. Yeah. Okay. One more question from coming online and or came from the folks online. As we're talking about investment earlier, and certainly pay within this industry is challenging. So the question is, should you be offering equity to your employees? The panel is stumped.
So I think we got to be honest about what equity means, right? It would be nice if everyone owned a little bit of it, right? We would all love that. But if you've got $10 in the pot and we're trying to split this 100 ways, it doesn't quite work. So I would tell you to be considerate of, is equity the right model, or is profit sharing the right model, or is bonuses the right model? What is the right pricing model to incentivize your people that doesn't necessarily mean you're taking money out of the pot to invest in your business? Because once you start doing equity distributions, depending on what that setup looks like, you might really be saying we're now underfunding our business because we're giving it away to our people, and we're hurting ourselves and being able to grow. So it's nice in theory, but think about some other options that you might have for that.
I would probably ask your lawyer. Would be my first piece. I can speak for myself. We give equity to people on our team. We think it's important for them to want to see our vision and to grow with us. I have also seen nightmare scenarios with that as well. There's no getting the equity back. Usually, I know Tier talked a little bit about buying the equity back. I'm sure that wasn't like a wonderful experience. So just be careful around who you're giving equity to and make sure that it's like for life sort of thing, if that makes sense. I love the analogy of planning for the divorce. Man, I wish I planned for some of the divorces with equity that I've given out to just some degree. And there isn't always necessarily an easy way out of that, right? Where you're not ready to write a check to the person. So just be careful of it. We've done it personally. I've made mistakes with doing it as well. But I also think ask your lawyer would probably be my first advice with it.
Lucas, do you have anything to add? And then we'll wrap that up.
Yeah, don't give equity.
Simple as that. Okay, yeah. And I mean, and if you are, is have your employees test drive them, make sure that they're vested and that they're doing the work and supporting and following your corporate goals and mission. So that wraps up this roundtable. Thank you so much, Lake, for an excellent job. Sierra, Lucas, and Jacob, thank you very much. So we have 45 minutes for lunch right now. It is set up, ready to go. I have a request from Dr. Coop that all of us who have graduated or are currently in the University of Maryland Medical Cannabis Science and Therapeutics Master's of Science program, let's get right over there for a photo together.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Like that.